Welcome back to Criminally Human, where behind every headline is a person, a story, and a tragedy that didn't have to happen. Tonight, we step into the shadows of 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. A house where 4 promising lives were stolen in the dead of night, and where 2 others walked away. Survivors, they were called. But the question that refuses to die is simple. Survivors of what, and survivors why? Their words don't match the evidence. Their memories don't match the facts. And their actions don't match what anyone would expect from people living through a massacre. They said they heard fireworks in the middle of the night. They said the wrong victim screamed for her life. They invited friends over before calling 911. And after it all, one admitted she took an Advil and went back to bed. Was this trauma? Or was this a story carefully crafted to protect themselves? Tonight we tear apart the inconsistencies, the motives, and the conspiracies, and ask the question too many are afraid to. Were these roommates really frozen in fear? Or were they lying? When 4 University of Idaho students were found brutally murdered inside their King Road home on November 13, 2022, the crime shocked the nation. 4 young lives, gone in a matter of minutes. The brutality of the killings left investigators scrambling and a community terrified. But right away, people weren't just asking, who did this? They were also asking, how did 2 people inside that house survive? From day one, the spotlight wasn't just on the accused killer, Brian Kohberger. It was also on the 2 surviving roommates, Dylan and Bethany. Their names were released, their stories scrutinized, their behavior dissected. And for good reason, because their accounts didn't line up with what we know. Police said they were traumatized, frozen, unable to process what was happening. And yes, trauma can fracture memory. But trauma doesn't usually erase the same person from the story again and again. Trauma doesn't turn violent thuds into fireworks. Trauma doesn't lead you to call friends before 911. Trauma doesn't explain taking an Advil and going back to bed. So what really happened in that house? Were these women truly paralyzed by fear? Or were they rewriting reality to protect themselves? Or someone else? One of the strangest statements from the surviving roommates is almost unbelievable. On body cam footage, one of them says she heard a pop like a firework. Before we move on, please like and subscribe. Now stop and think about that. It's 4 a.m. in November. No holiday, no celebration, no reason for fireworks. The house is in a quiet college town. And upstairs and downstairs, her friends are being murdered. Yet in her mind, what she heard wasn't violence. It was a firework. Some defenders say this was trauma, the brain protecting itself by substituting a safe sound for a dangerous one. That's possible. But critics see something else. A minimization tactic. If you admit you heard a violent noise, you also admit you ignored it. You admit you failed to act. But if you call it a firework, suddenly you're innocent. You thought it was nothing. You couldn't have known. But would you really mistake murder for fireworks? Especially because they say the victims were stabbed. In a silent house. In the dead of night. Or is that excuse just a little too convenient? The contradictions deepen when Dylan tells officers that she heard Kaylee scream, "Someone's here," and even claims Kaylee ran downstairs. But we now know that never happened. Forensic reconstructions and autopsies confirm Kaylee and Maddie were attacked in bed on the 3rd floor. They didn't run. They didn't shout warnings. They were asleep when the killer entered their room. The person who was awake, the person who screamed, the person who fought was Xana on the 2nd floor. Yet in Dylan's story, Xana disappears. Kaylee takes her place. That's not a fuzzy detail. That's a complete rewrite. Why would someone erase the victim who fought back? Why would they swap her for someone who never left her bed? Once is an error. Twice is a pattern. And the pattern here is clear. Xana's screams are silenced, even by those who lived to tell the tale. It doesn't stop there. Dylan also told officers she heard a male voice say, "You're going to be okay, I'm going to help you." And once again she said it was Kaylee. But according to evidence, it would have been Xana who was still alive in those final moments. Xana who was struggling. Xana who may have heard those words. Yet once again the story shifts away from her. She is erased. Kaylee takes the spotlight. Is this confusion or something else? Why is the victim who fought the hardest consistently replaced with someone else? Why is Xana's suffering scrubbed from the narrative, even in the very first statements to police? By morning, when officers finally arrived, the story only grew more unbelievable. The survivors described Xana as being passed out. Imagine it. Your roommate screams. You hear strange noises. You see a masked man. By daylight, your friend is unresponsive. And instead of assuming the worst, you call her passed out. Passed out from what? Drinking. Exhaustion. This wasn't a Friday night hangover. This was a crime scene. Yet the language softens it, dismisses it, excuses why no one called for help. It's a detail that feels rehearsed. Because once again, it downplays the horror, pushes urgency away. It makes the inaction sound almost logical. And then comes the most damning decision of all. Instead of calling 911 immediately, the survivors called friends. Those friends arrived, walked into the house and saw the scene. By the time 911 was finally called at nearly noon, the crime scene was compromised. This is the part that makes no sense if you believe the trauma froze them theory. Trauma might paralyze you in the moment. But hours later, trauma doesn't lead you to invite multiple people into a murder scene. That's not trauma. That's stalling. And if you wanted to buy time, to distance yourself from the crime, to give the killer a head start, to figure out what story to tell, stalling is exactly what you would do. But nothing breaks public trust more than this detail. After hearing pops like fireworks, after supposedly hearing Kaylee scream, after hearing a male voice, after seeing Xana passed out, one survivor admitted she took an Advil and went back to sleep. Think about that. Really think about it. Your house is filled with strange noises. Your friends are screaming. A masked man is in the house. One roommate is unresponsive. And your reaction is to take a painkiller and crawl back into bed. Trauma can make people freeze. Can cause panic. But does it really cause someone to medicate and nap while surrounded by blood and silence? Or does that sound more like someone who already knew what had happened and didn't want to get involved? Another strange decision. Police allowed Dylan and Bethany to stay together during questioning. Every investigator knows the rule. Separate witnesses immediately. You don't want them influencing each other. You don't want them comparing notes. You want raw, independent statements. But here they stood side by side, wrapped in blankets, echoing each other's words. But why? Was it oversight? Or was it intentional? A way to let them build a unified story. If you believed they were lying, keeping them together would be the worst mistake. Unless, of course, you wanted their stories to match. And then there's Bethany, the other survivor. Unlike Dylan, she has never spoken publicly. Not in interviews. Not in documentaries. Not even in clarifications. Her silence has become its own kind of testimony. What did she hear? What did she see? Did her version contradict Dylan's? Was it so different that it threatened the entire narrative? The longer Bethany stays silent, the more suspicion grows. Silence, in this case, isn't neutral. It's protective. Protective of herself. Protective of Dylan. Or protective of something even bigger. So why would they lie? Why erase Xana? Why delay calling for help? Why minimize every detail? 3 motives surface again and again. Ethan Chapin was dating Xana. That's undeniable. But some in their circle whisper that one of the survivors may have briefly been linked to Ethan before. But in a college town with overlapping parties and Greek life, it's plausible. And if true, it would explain the strangest part of all: the erasure of Xana. If a survivor carried jealousy or resentment, downplaying Xana becomes personal. In her version of events, Xana doesn't scream, doesn't fight, doesn't hear her killer. She's erased, replaced with Kaylee. Was this subconscious bias? Or deliberate storytelling? Rumors of drugs at the King Roadhouse have swirled since day one. Some neighbors complained of strangers lurking, doors left open, people coming and going. Reddit threads and conspiracy forums call it a party house with darker secrets. If there was drug activity, even casually, it could explain why the survivors were so careful with their words. Because admitting what they saw might have also meant admitting what they were involved in. Silence doesn't just protect people from killers. Protects reputations. Protects secrets. In One Night in Idaho and other coverage, one speculation kept surfacing online. Was Ethan tied to drugs? Was the house itself a target because of it? There's no evidence to prove this. But documentaries didn't always shut the theory down either. And when mainstream platforms acknowledge that whispers exist, it fuels speculation even more. Because if Ethan was targeted, then Xana's erasure becomes even more suspicious. Survivors may not have wanted to spotlight the one victim tied to him that night. Better to keep the focus elsewhere. Better to shift everything onto Kaylee. The darkest theory is this: the survivors weren't just unlucky. They were protected. Why else were they allowed to stay together? Why else were their inconsistencies brushed aside? Why has one of them stayed silent to this day? The theory says they were informants or assets or tied to something bigger, and protecting them mattered more than telling the whole truth. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Criminally Human. Please like and subscribe, but most of all, stay human.